Okay, so let's get into this. For our deep dive today, we're starting in Mexico City. Just try to picture this scene.
Right. You have a well-known singer-songwriter, a guy named Chogo El Bandeno. He's a big deal in his community.
And he's hundreds of miles from his home on the coast, and he gets stopped by the police in the city.
And this wasn't just, a routine traffic stop or anything like that. The police look at him, a black man, and their immediate assumption is that he must be an illegal immigrant
In his own country,
in the
in the
capitals.
capital. It's just this incredible paradox, a Mexican citizen being treated like a foreigner.
And this is the part that just floors me, and it really anchors our entire discussion today. To prove he was Mexican, his ID wasn't enough.
No, not even close.
They made him sing the national anthem, not once,
But 3 times.
3 times. And then after that, he had to list the governors of 5 different states. He had to pass this pop quiz on civics just to be allowed to exist in that space. And that story, as disturbing as it is, it really gets to the absolute heart of the problem we're exploring. This deep-seated official denial and just general lack of awareness about the 1.4 million people who identify as Afro-Mexican.
So that's our mission today. We're going to unpack the history, the really vibrant culture, and the critical political fight for recognition for this community. A
Yeah.
population that activists say, and I'm quoting here, has been ignored and erased from history.
And what's so wild is how this invisibility is even possible when you consider that Black people have been part of Mexico's story since the 16th century. Their roots are incredibly deep.
Absolutely. So let's start right there with the history. Most Afro-Mexicans have lived for centuries in one main area, the Costa Chica.
That's the Pacific coast, stretching across the states of Oaxaca and Guerrero.
And their ancestors were brought there from Africa as slaves starting way back in the 1500s. They were brought in to replace the indigenous workers who had been just devastated by disease and, colonial brutality.
But their role in that colonial system was, well, it was unique. The sources we looked at really highlight this. The Spanish cattle ranchers, they didn't just use them for any old labor.
Right.
They were specifically used as foremen, as overseers.
So they were in a position of authority.
Exactly. They were supervising the indigenous workers who, at the time, weren't familiar with handling large animals like horses and cows.
That creates such a complicated historical dynamic, doesn't it? It means they weren't at the very bottom of that social ladder. They were sort of in between.
In a way, yeah, set apart from the Spanish elite, but also from the indigenous communities. And that unique position probably contributes to where they are today, kind of falling through the cracks of what it means to be either indigenous or, mainstream Mexican.
Which brings us to the present day, because the consequences of being erased from that national story are just severe. The Chogo El Bandeno story is not a one-off.
Not at all. It's systemic. I mean, you look at the cases documented by Clemente Jesus Lopez. He runs the government office for Afro-Mexicans in Oaxaca.
And his stories are even more extreme.
Oh, absolutely. He talks about 2 separate cases, 2 different women, both carrying their official, valid Mexican ID cards.
And despite having proof of citizenship,
They were detained by police and deported.
deported. Where could they possibly deport a Mexican citizen to?
Well, one woman was sent to Honduras, the other one was sent to Haiti.
On what grounds? What was the justification?
The justification, if you can call it that, was brutally simple. The police just insisted, and this is almost a direct quote, "In Mexico, there are no Black people."
Wow.
So their documents meant nothing. Their physical appearance and this powerful lie that Mexico is not a country with Black people, that's what mattered.
That is it's a profound level of denial. The state itself, through the police, is literally enforcing a historical fiction.
And both women did eventually get back with help from Mexican consulates, but there was no apology, no compensation, nothing. It just shows the complete lack of power the community has when their very existence can just be denied.
So if you're going to fight for recognition, the first step has to be just getting counted, right?
Yeah.
Getting on paper.
Right. And that's where the 2015 interim census was such a breakthrough.
What changed?
For the first time ever, it had a box you could check to self-identify as Black or Negro. It was a huge step. It moved them from just being a cultural idea to being a demographic that could actually be measured.
And what did the numbers show?
The census found a population of about 1.4 million people. So that's around 1.2% of the total Mexican population.
And to put that 1.2% in perspective,
Well, you have to compare it to the indigenous population, which in the 2010 census was almost 10% of the country. So even in Oaxaca, which is their heartland, Afro-Mexicans are only about 5% of the state's population. They're a minority within a minority, in a way.
So their voices can get drowned out.
Very easily.
Okay, so let's move beyond the numbers, because the idea of identity here is way more complex than just appearance, especially in Mexico with its long history of, mestizaje or mixing.
It's incredibly fluid. One source quotes a local council worker, Tulia Serrano Arellanes, and she says it's not just about skin color. It's about how you feel.
I like that. So it's about ancestry and culture, not just what you look like. You could have a black grandmother and feel black, even if you don't necessarily look black to an outsider.
Exactly. And some people in the community are very hard to distinguish visually from their indigenous neighbors.
And that self-identification seems to be really tied to place. If you live in a town that's known as a black town, like Santiago Llano Grande,
Which is Chogo El Bandeno's hometown.
right, then you're much more likely to think of yourself as black because the whole community reinforces that identity.
And it's interesting, the terms they use vary. The census used Negro or black, but many people prefer the word Moreno, which just means dark, or they have other local terms. It suggests this identity is really organic and internal, not something imposed by a government form.
And this identity has survived for so long because it's tied to these incredibly unique cultural traditions.
For sure. The culture is like their armor against being erased.
So let's talk about that culture, starting with the music, the sound of the Costa Chica.
Okay, so the main musical style is called the Chilena, which means Chilean.
Chilean. How did that happen?
It was brought to the area in the 1800s by Chilean sailors. They were sailing up the coast, a lot of them on their way to the California Gold Rush.
And the Afro-Mexican community just adopted it and made it their own.
They did. It seems like the rhythm and the structure really clicked with the African diasporic music they already had. But what's really distinct are the instruments they used to play it.
This is where you find the real cultural fingerprints. Tell us about the quijada.
The quijada. It's literally a dried-out donkey's jawbone.
You're kidding.
Not at all. They use it for percussion. When you hit it, the molar teeth are loose and they rattle inside the bone, creating this really unique rattling sound.
That's incredible ingenuity, just using what's around you from the ranch. And then there's the other instrument, the bote.
The bote is a friction drum, so you don't hit it. There's a stick attached to the drum skin, and you rub the stick.
And what does that sound like?
It makes this deep kind of growling percussive noise, and those two sounds together, the rattle of the jawbone and the growl of the drum, that's the sound of the Costa Chica, it's unmistakable.
And this cultural pride isn't just in the music, it's also in dance,
Yeah.
right? The famous Dance of the Devils.
Yes, the Dance of the Devils, they perform it around the Day of the Dead, so late October, early November, and it's like a piece of living history theater.
It goes back to the colonial ranching days.
Directly. The dancers wear these amazing devil masks, but the real story is in the main characters.
You have Pancho, who leads the whole thing,
Yeah.
and he represents the arrogant colonial ranch foreman walking around with a whip.
Exactly, a symbol of that old power structure. And he's always accompanied by his wife. She's supposed to be this buxom white woman.
Who's always played by a black man.
Always. And he flirts with everyone, the other devils, the audience.
Ugh.
It's this complex, funny, and probably satirical performance poking fun at the old colonial dynamics.
It's powerful, turning history into this festive public ritual. And it's not just for the adults, right?
Yeah.
The sources say this is taught from a very young age.
Oh, yeah. In these towns, even kids in nursery school learn the steps to the Dance of the Devils. It instills this deep pride in their black heritage right from the beginning.
But all of this vibrant, living culture, it just hits a brick wall when it comes to getting official recognition.
It does, and that's where the political stakes get really, really high.
So if the culture is so distinct and the history is so clear, what is the official reason for not recognizing them as a constitutional minority? What's the excuse?
The official excuse is, well, it's what makes the whole thing so discriminatory. Humberto Hebet Silva, the guy who runs the Afro-Mexican Affairs Bureau in Oaxaca, he lays it out.
What does he say?
He says they're consistently told they can't be recognized as a minority because they speak Spanish.
Wait.
They don't have their own distinct indigenous mother tongue.
So, let me get this straight. Centuries of forced assimilation, where their ancestors had to adopt Spanish to survive, is now being used as the reason to deny them minority rights.
That is precisely the argument. Silva says the government tells them, quote, language is the real criterion. That rule is designed for indigenous groups, but it completely erases the history of anyone brought through slavery and forced to assimilate linguistically.
It's a legal definition that writes them out of existence. It's a massive barrier, and you can see why the community sees it as just blatant discrimination.
And this isn't just about feelings or historical validation. There are very real, tangible things at stake.
Right. It's about funding.
It's about huge funding streams. Federal money for promoting their culture, sure, but more importantly, for public health programs, for infrastructure, things that affect day-to-day life and even life expectancy in these communities.
But for some activists, like the teacher Israel Reyes, it's even bigger than the money.
He argues that the recognition itself is the most important thing. It's about correcting that fundamental wrong, the fact that their history has been ignored and erased. They want to be in the textbooks. They want to be in the Constitution.
And this desperation, this feeling that all the normal legal channels have failed, is pushing the conversation into a much more serious place.
A very serious place.
This is where that community leader, Humberto Hebert Silva, he brings up the idea of radical action.
He does. He warns that the community is starting to look at the example of the Zapatista uprising in Chiapas back in the 1990s.
And in Mexico, that comparison that's incredibly loaded.
Oh, yeah.
The Zapatistas were an armed rebellion that forced the government to the negotiating table.
It absolutely is. The fact that a leader is even saying that out loud shows a total loss of faith in the system.
Silva's actually quoted saying that an armed uprising may be the only way to get the rights we're entitled to. He's pointing to this massive gap between what politicians say about equality and the fact that the Constitution doesn't even acknowledge that they exist.
And when you trace the whole story from being deported by police who say you don't exist to being denied rights because of a language technicality, that threat of radical action starts to sound less like a threat and more like a predictable conclusion.
It's a really sobering place to end our deep dive. We've gone all the way from the 16th century, from enslaved people on the Costa Chica, to this unique culture of survival symbolized by the rattling Quijada.
And we've seen how that vibrant identity is just legally canceled out by a definition of minority that prioritizes language over history, leaving people without funding, without recognition, and even facing deportation from their own country.
Which leaves us with a final and I think necessary provocative thought for you to take away. We've seen that Afro-Mexicans are denied constitutional rights because their ancestors adopted Spanish, the language of the colonizer.
And yet their identity survives through these very specific non-linguistic things, right? The sound of a boat drum, the story in The Dance of the Devils.
So here's the question. If a state erases your history from its official story and denies you basic rights based on a technicality like that, what level of action is justified to force that state to just acknowledge that you exist?
And what does it say about a country when its community leaders are warning that the only path to getting their rights might be to threaten an armed uprising? To follow the path of one of the most serious conflicts in the nation's recent memory, that's a question worth some serious thought.